Women, you need to understand something. Men are not as dumb as you think they are. My wife has a really good thing that she says, and she goes, if your clothing is a frame for your face from which the glory of God is to shine, it's proper. If it draws attention to your face. If your clothing draws attention to your body, to outline it, to make it noticed, then it's sensual. What you're doing is wrong. Women hate women. The people who hate women more than anybody else on this planet are feminists. They hate women. They want women to be men. They don't want them to be women. And any woman who says, I believe that it is my desire to be in my home, to raise godly children, to support my husband in the endeavors that he has to go through in order to provide for our family, any woman who does that is considered a failure in our society. She's looked down upon, and I know that from personal experience. I know the things that my wife has suffered, the things that people have said, because, they say, why don't you help your husband? And she says, well, I do. No, why don't you get a job? I mean, as a minister, he doesn't make that much money. You could provide other things. What? If we go to Genesis, it says, let's go to chapter 1, verse 27. God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them. So we see here that both man and woman were created in the image of God. And both of them have an equal standing before God. The roles that they play in the marriage has nothing to do with a lack of equality. When we will get to the point where it says that a man is head of his home and a wife is to live in submission to her husband, it does not mean that the wife is less than her husband. It does not mean that. If you think it does, then guess what? You've just destroyed the Trinity. Because did not the Son submit to his Father? So did that make the Son less than his Father? If you say yes, then you have just committed heresy. Within the Trinity itself, the Son submitted to his Father. And yet the Bible says the Son and the Father are one and they are equal. So my wife and I, we are one and we are equal. We function in different roles. Now today everyone says, no, if you've got to have the same role or you're not equal. That's why there's this push by feminists that women ought to be fighting on the front lines. That women ought to be doing what men do in everything. And if you deny women that, then you're not treating them as equal. No, what you're doing is you're denying that men and women are different and that they were made different by a Creator God. We are different and we were created for different roles. But we are equal. We're all made in the image of God. God blessed them in verse 28 and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. That subdue the earth was also given to the woman. But there is a different role in subduing the earth. Now, someone can think that they've been a wonderful mother even though they've been a failure as a wife, and that's not true. If you've been a failure as a wife, you've been a failure as a mother. Now, I have a friend in Peru who's very bold, and on Mother's Day, that's what he preached. He said he was bold, I said he was crazy. But the greatest thing that my wife can do for her children is to love her husband and respect him. We're one flesh. It's the highest and most important relationship. And I am not a good father if I jump over the mother and dedicate myself to the children, which is very easy to do. Men and women were made by God to be different. Now, why did He make us this way? Because marriage is not ultimately about marriage. Marriage is ultimately about us representing the relationship between Christ and the church. Can the church grow independently of Christ? No. Women were created to grow with their husband, with the help of their husband, under the tutelage of their husband. That does not mean he lords it over her or he knows more than her, but she was just made for that reason. You leave her alone or think that she's strong and can make it on her own, which is oftentimes my sin, and you're going to mess up the whole thing of what God is wanting to do. Let's go ahead now and go to Ephesians 5 in verse 22. Well, let's go to verse 21. And be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. So that's, believers are to be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, what he's really talking about, because of verse 21, is that there ought to be a mutual submission. And by saying that, they cancel out submission altogether. If there's mutual submission, then what do you do when there's a disagreement? And how can there be headship and leadership in mutual civil submission? Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. You do it for the sake of the Lord. Now, let me just show you a practical way in which this works. Let's say that a big decision has to be made in our family. And I look at that big decision. I don't just make the decision. Say, well, I'm the boss. But no. What I do is, my most trusted counselor with decisions regarding my family should be my wife. So we have to make this big decision. I go and talk to my wife. I want to hear what she has to say. And if we're in agreement, bam, okay, let's make the decision. If we're not in agreement, that's a real red flag for me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to postpone that decision if I can, so that she and I can pray together, talk about it more until we come to unity. And when we come to unity, I'll make that decision. But now, if the decision has to be made and we can wait no longer, as the head of my family, it's my job to make that decision. And if I am right and my wife is wrong, I do not gloat over her. And if she is right and I'm wrong, she does not gloat over me, ladies. Dear sisters, there's something that you need to recognize. Your husband is going to be judged more severely than you. When he's wrong, you should not gloat over him. You should be brokenhearted. Because he's going to be called to account for the wrong decision he has made. You need to be praying for him. His is a fearful, fearful job. Even though he may not know it. Even though your husband may just make decisions nonchalantly because he really hasn't learned the fear of the Lord, you need to pray that he does. And when he makes a wrong decision, you really need to be a blessing to him. Now, I want you to notice something here. It says, wives, be subject to your own husbands. And then, in the end, in verse 33, it says, nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Now, it's interesting here that it doesn't say that wives are supposed to love their husbands. It says they're supposed to submit to them and respect them. And it's interesting that here it doesn't say that husbands are to submit to and respect their wives, but they are to love their wives. Now, that does not mean that husbands are not to respect their wives or that women aren't to love their husbands. That's not what it means. But it does tell us something that's very interesting. I do not need my wife to call me 3 times a day and say, honey, I love you. I don't need her to send me flowers that says, I love you. I mean, I'm sorry, I just don't need that. I don't. What do I need? I need my wife to respect me. That's what I need. As a man, I'm made different than a woman. I need my wife to respect me. The whole world. I can wake up one morning, and sometimes with the internet I feel like I do, and every person in the world standing outside in my yard with down with Paul signs. Paul should die. Paul's a false prophet. Paul's this. I mean, I get everything you can't imagine. That really doesn't affect me. What does affect me is when my wife, when I feel as though she does not respect me. That kills me. It takes all the strength out of me. You want your husband to be strong? Respect him. Honor him. I'm telling you, we've been raised in a culture where we've been led to believe that we're just alike, men and women. And we're not. We're not just alike. Now, my wife needs respect, your wife needs respect, but primarily what they need is an affirmation that they are loved, especially today. I mean, a woman's not even worthy of love in today's culture unless she's 5'10" and weighs 7 kilos or something. But now he goes to 9. He says, likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments. Whoa. But I want you to look at some things. I want you to see, first of all, likewise, I want women to adorn themselves. Now, he wants women to adorn themselves. Okay? So adornment's not bad. But that adornment, we're going to see, is in verse 11. In verse 10, it's good works, godliness, a quiet and submissive spirit. Now, but let's go on. He says, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing. That tells me that there is clothing that's improper for a Christian woman. All right? I mean, that's just logic. There is clothing that is improper for a Christian woman. Now, he says, the clothing must be modest. Modest. This is very important. It's literally proper clothing with modesty is the way it goes in the original text. So, with modesty. My wife has a really good thing that she says, and she goes, if your clothing is a frame for your face from which the glory of God is to shine, it's proper. If it draws attention to your face. If your clothing draws attention to your body, to outline it, to make it noticed, then it's sensual. What you're doing is wrong. There is a difference between beauty and sensuality. And God is not against beauty. He is against sensuality. In Philippians, we are told to think on things that are excellent, that are noble, that are just, that are right, that are true. The way a woman carries herself and the way she dresses ought to promote the following types of words: modesty, discretion, wisdom, beauty, elegance, refinement, but not sensuality, luxury, extravagance. Now, ladies, this is, I've been giving your husbands a lot of tasks. Let me give you one. Seek to find out what this means and go wherever the Lord shows you. There is nothing more attractive than a woman who has this look of wisdom and discretion and nobility and simplicity. Simplicity. It's just a simple beauty about her.